Good evening to everyone. It's a great honor to open this lecture. It will be in English as we are making a video of the lecture that we're going to use after that. My name is Maxim Delchev. I am the Executive Director of the Organization of the Jews in Bulgaria, SHALOM, and we are very honored to have Professor Clinton with us to discuss this very important topic. And I'm not going to speak for a while, as I'll leave that to the experts in the field, but I want to make two things that are important for us as an organization. First of all is the rise of anti-Semitism in the campus is a fact. It's not a worrying trend. It's not something that we're expecting to happen in the next few years. It's something that is already happening. And the first major thing that is concerning us, that this topic is outside of the scope of any human rights organization or any organization that is destined to fight any kind of prejudice and intolerance. And as an organization of the Jews in Bulgaria and one of the leading NGOs in Bulgaria, we are very worried that this trend that is happening in the States will soon be seen here in Bulgaria, and we already are seeing this as rhetoric from Bulgarian NGOs and human rights organizations. That's the first thing. And the second was why, and I'm very grateful to the Bulgarian Academy of Science to giving us this space to discuss this, because the topic of anti-Semitism should not be discussed in the synagogues and should not be discussed in Jewish community centers. We have a very wonderful hall in the Jewish community center that we can easily invite everyone to participate. But this topic should be discussed in academical circles, in the public sphere, in the society, because anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a societal problem. It's an issue that everyone in the society should be fighting, because it's like the yellow canary in the mine. It's the first sign of a major issue with our society. So I see this lecture, and we as an organization, the major representative of the Jews in Bulgaria, we see this event as a beginning of our major information campaign to Bulgarian society of the danger that soon probably will come also here. And we need to be prepared to step against that kind of danger. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your gracious introduction and invitation to share my thoughts on this painfully relevant topic. The topic of my talk today is Campus Anti-Semitism Today, its causes and how to disarm it. I consider it an especially high honor to be here with you today in this magnificent Grand Salon of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. I wish to express our deepest gratitude to the SHALOM organization of the Jews in Bulgaria for co-organizing this event, to Dr. Todor Chubanov, to Mr. Maxim Delchev, to Ms. Daria Melamed, and everybody in SHALOM who helped organize this event. And there will be a small reception afterwards, which is for a good cause to support young people and children with autism in Bulgaria, and we are all invited to participate and ask questions during the reception. I have been tremendously fortunate to establish and manage, together with my husband, Professor Kevin Clinton, who is in the audience, two partner charities that promote academic cooperation and American values. These are the American Research Center in Bulgaria Incorporated. This is an American charity established in Virginia. And the American Research Center in SOFIA Foundation. This is a Bulgarian charity. Next slide. You can see the building of the American Research Center in Sofia. It has a public library open to everyone. We have supported to date several hundred students and scholars and over 20 publications with some historical significance. Jewish history is a major research topic at these institutions, and we have recently established the Tzvi Keren Residential Fellowship in Jewish Studies in memory of a dearest friend and a remarkable scholar whose work we are proud to have helped support and publicize. Next slide. You can see here two of the publications by Dr. Keren that we supported. The first is a corpus of epitaphs from the Jewish cemetery of Karnobat, which gives several hundred years of amazing historical evidence about the Jewish community in Bulgaria. And the second is a collection of articles about Jewish life in Bulgaria. On a personal note, let me share that I have been a philo-Semite ever since I remember myself. I kept thinking as a teenager how evil and unjust it was that a people that has contributed so much to humanity has been so viciously hated and persecuted everywhere it goes. My moral and rational convictions were fortified by a sense of deep empathy and affection, which many Bulgarians happen to share. I grew up surrounded by my family's numerous Jewish acquaintances who were always among our closest friends. I remember a funny story that I wish to share with you today that illustrates this bond. Next slide. When I was about 4 years old, one of my mother's Jewish friends, whom I affectionately called Aunt Zelma, asked me playfully, "Nora, dear, do you wish to become my daughter-in-law?" I immediately agreed, then a minute later decided to double-check, just in case what I had agreed to. "Aunt Zelma," I inquired, "what does daughter-in-law actually mean?" She smiled in response. "It means you will marry my son when you grow up." "Well," I replied, "is he handsome, smart, and good-hearted?" "Oh, very much so," she said. "All right then," I settled the matter. Like millions of people in the world today, I felt devastated and heartbroken by the barbarous attack on Israel on October 7th. I'm also appalled, though not surprised, by the morally perverse reaction to the atrocities across Western campuses and cities. I'm aware that anti-Semitism has existed since time immemorial and throughout recorded history. It is a uniquely pathological form of racism coming from many different directions and political persuasions and exemplifying the worst of human nature. Next slide. Unlike its historical predecessors, however, current anti-Semitism on Western campuses is closely related to anti-Western indoctrination in schools and media. There is a direct correlation between the level of anti-Western propaganda in a given college or university and its anti-Semitic atmosphere. Current anti-Semitism on Western campuses corresponds to anti-Western propaganda that demonizes prosperous and humane societies such as Israel or the United States. It is shocking to see many formerly prestigious centers of academic excellence exhibit such attitudes and utter inability to decisively condemn anti-Semitism. On the other hand, small liberal arts colleges that teach, for example, a classical curriculum and emphasize the achievements of Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian civilizations are mostly free from anti-Semitic incidents. How do we explain that? In a recent speech and essay, next slide, the publisher of the Mosaic magazine and founder of the Lobel Center for Jewish Classical Education, Eric Cohen, remarked, quote, "The rival images emerging from universities across our land reveal a great struggle for the American soul. It is a tale of two cultures, with Jews and Israel at the center of the story. The Jews represent everything the enemies of American civilization seek to destroy. As go the Jews, so goes the West. The radical activists and their academic apologists understand this deep civilizational truth, and so must we, end quote. Over the past 15 years, anti-Western indoctrination has reached extreme forms. It has become the prevalent narrative in public schools, mainstream media, universities, government institutions, entertainment and sports industries, and even private corporations. This narrative teaches children to hate and be ashamed of their country, to denounce Western civilization and Judeo-Christian values, and to reject institutions such as the family, traditional community associations, or the concept of national sovereignty at the expense of some totalitarian globalist utopias. American society today, to use Lincoln's expression, is a house divided, embroiled in a war of values, almost as brutal as the Civil War. People who disagree in their politics seldom talk and listen to each other anymore. I realize that many of us are deeply hurting. That is why I wish to propose a common ground and a common solution to the disturbing spike in anti-Semitism that we see in the West today. I think that regardless of our politics, we could all agree on what is truly humane and essential. Where does this anti-Western indoctrination come from? Part of the problem, in my view, comes from language manipulation and lack of terminological clarity. The terms left and right, for example, are notoriously misleading and unhelpful, especially when discussed in their perceived radical versions. Communism is referred to as a far-left ideology, and Nazism as a far-right ideology. But these two systems are the two sides of the same coin of totalitarian socialism. It is no coincidence that Hitler and Stalin were allies at first and concluded a pact for their desired division of Europe on August 23, 1939, as you well know. Next slide. It makes much better sense to distinguish between liberal and conservative attitudes, which balance each other and serve as normal components of Western civic life, while communism and National Socialism are radical and collectivistic systems, which cannot be considered either liberal, since they eliminate freedom, or conservative, since they reject tradition. I prefer to differentiate between American and Western values on one hand and totalitarian systems on the other. By American and Western values, I mean the ideals of personal, political, and economic freedom, the notion that people are born equal with certain innate rights, that the government, a limited government, should protect. And by totalitarian ideology, I mean both communism and National Socialism, which are ideologically connected with Marxism. While anti-Semitism, as previously noted, has existed in many different varieties of venomous hatred, envy, and intolerance, I believe that the strain of the anti-Semitic virus we see on campuses today is predominantly Marxist in its origins and ideology. As someone who has experienced communist oppression as a child and young adult, I have developed a painfully acute awareness of Marxist propaganda in all of its disguises and permutations, including the current globalist and anti-Western narratives that have become the norm in many European and American educational institutions. Paradoxically, when communism started to collapse in Eastern Europe in 1989, the New York Times published an article by Felicity Barringer titled "The Mainstreaming of Marxism in United States Colleges," published on October 25th, 1989. By 1989, Marxism featuring envy and hatred of Western civilization, European culture, and the success generated by free market economies, had become the primary ideology in American and Western European universities. This tendency reached an extreme expression over the past 15 years and was reflected in government and corporate policies. Here, it is essential to emphasize that I mean absolutely no offense to the millions of well-intentioned and compassionate people who at some point may have believed in Marxism. Marxist ideology has a superbly honed ability to attract followers and disguise its true nature by using language manipulation. This is also true of totalitarianism in both its forms, National Socialism and Communism, which always manipulate words to control minds. Holocaust survivor and prominent linguist Victor Klemperer observed, next slide, "Language does not simply write and think for me. It also increasingly dictates my feelings and governs my entire spiritual being the more unquestioningly and unconsciously I abandon myself to it. Words can be like tiny doses of arsenic. They're swallowed unnoticed, appear to have no effect, and then after a little while, the toxic reaction sets in after all. If someone replaces the words heroic and virtuous with fanatical for long enough, he will come to believe that the fanatic really is a virtuous hero, and that no one can be a hero without fanaticism." Similarly, reflecting on the Soviet use of language, renowned Russian historian and dissident Mikhail Heller remarked, next slide, "Total power over the word gives the master of the word a magical power over all communications. In Soviet language, the same words are repeated over and over again until they become a signal that acts without any effort of thought. While both National Socialists and Communists relied on propaganda and language manipulation, the Nazis were less sophisticated in their attempts to conceal the evil nature of their ideology. Communists have far surpassed them in taking over the liberal linguistic and cultural space. This is painfully visible in the terminology new Marxist media are using today to describe the conflict in the Middle East. They twist and transpose the meaning of words and create a labyrinth of moral confusion. As the renowned British and Israeli journalist Melanie Phillips wrote recently, quote, "Thousands believe that Palestinian genocide is resistance and Israeli resistance is genocide," end quote. Differentiating between liberalism and Marxism is absolutely essential, in my view, in finding a way out of this moral maze. I'm convinced that both liberal and conservative Americans can unite in defending their Jewish brothers and sisters and the just cause of Israel. What do I mean when I posit that anti-Semitism on our campuses today is predominantly Marxist? By Marxist, I mean ultimately deriving from, directly or indirectly, the doctrine of Marx and Engels. The goal of this doctrine, as you well know, is a utopian society without private property, money, marriage, religion, family, and community structures, where everyone would live blissfully, receiving according to his needs and contributing according to his abilities. Marxism seeks to destroy Western tradition and society by any means necessary in order to liberate the poor and oppressed. The first step is the establishment of socialism via political dictatorship and nationalization of private property, as it actually happened in communist countries. Marx regularly urged for a violent revolution. Next slide. He wrote, "To revenge the misdeeds of the ruling class, there existed in the Middle Ages in Germany a secret tribunal called the Femgericht. If a red cross was seen marked on a house, people knew that its owner was doomed by the fam. All the houses in Europe are now marked with the mysterious Red Cross. History is the judge, its executioner the proletarian, end quote. The death of 100 million innocent people in communist countries is the logical result of Marxist theory and practice, not an aberration of a fine theory gone wrong. Marxism sees history and the world through the lens of power struggle. It divides humanity into ever-changing and evolving categories of victims and oppressors. Anyone who is successful, talented, wealthy, independent, educated, is seen as a potential enemy, ripe for extermination as a matter of social resistance and justice. We can see this mentality in the deeply flawed and erroneous way in which Israel has been vilified as the colonial and imperialist power in the Middle East, while in fact its ancestral land has been colonized, and it grants full rights and benefits to its non-Jewish residents. Marxism is closely related to totalitarian socialism. Next slide. As Alan Kors, a distinguished professor at the University of Pennsylvania, remarked, "No cause ever in the history of all mankind has produced more cold-blooded tyrants, more slaughtered innocents, and more orphans than socialism with power," end quote. Marxism roots lie in the German and French Enlightenment tradition, which promotes socialism as an antithesis to liberalism and glorifies the forced sacrifice of individual rights to benefit the state or a favored social group. Here, it is important to note that by socialism, I mean its totalitarian version, which is completely different from welfare and the so-called Scandinavian model, which rely on basically capitalism and free enterprise to generate economic surplus. Already in 1848, next slide, the renowned French writer and statesman Alexis de Tocqueville eloquently summarized the contrast between liberal democracy and socialism. Quote, "Democracy extends the sphere of individual independence. Socialism restricts it. Democracy gives all possible value to each man. Socialism makes each man an agent, an instrument, a number," end quote. Marxism influenced not only communism, but also fascism and National Socialism. It is inherently racist and discriminatory since it attributes collective guilt to a designated oppressor group and collective merit to a designated victim group regardless of individual character and deeds. Ayn Rand famously noted that racism is the lowest, most crudely primitive form of collectivism. Marx himself, very few people know that, deeply resented his Jewish heritage and expressed disturbingly racist and anti-Semitic sentiments. Next slide. He compared black people to animals, despised Mexican people, and expressed anti-Semitic ideas. He detested the Bible and biblical religion with fanatical fervor and dreamed of its abolition. He wrote one of the most offensive anti-Semitic essays in academic history titled On the Jewish Question, published in 1844. In it, he blamed the Jews, despite his heritage and ethnicity, for the purported evils of capitalism. He accused them using rather offensive epithets of greed, huckstering, and worshipping the god of money. And he also wrote that, according to his opinion, the only solution was the emancipation of society from Jewry. This essay has been published in many sources and is also freely available online if you wish to check the sources. Marxism denies objective morality and any notion of good and evil, and claims that anything that serves or hinders the interest of the working class, or whatever victim group may be the current social justice flavor, can be deemed good or bad at any given moment. It teaches that crime is caused by biological or socioeconomic factors and has nothing to do with free will or personal responsibility. Economically, Marxism advocates for totalitarian socialism and redistribution of wealth as a first step toward communism. The result, as we all know, has been that the state owns the means of production and has no incentive whatsoever to compete with itself, thus leading to poor quality, lack of choice, and ultimately ubiquitous poverty. Next slide. As many of us can remember, this was a typical line to buy bread during communism in our home city of Sofia. When the economic and political freedom of the West created unprecedented prosperity and opportunity, Marxist ideologues in Western institutions realized that they needed to transfer their attention from the working class to the education and culture in order to radically transform Western society from within, a process known as the Long March through the institutions. The proletarian revolution was replaced with a cultural revolution. Marxist intellectuals are unsurpassed masters of language manipulation. They managed to rewrite history across Western schools in a revisionist manner and create deep moral confusion. They portrayed Israel, America, and the West as the worst possible offenders in human history. A notable example, next slide, is Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which has become, unfortunately, the gold standard of history teaching in the USA. Eminent scholar Mary Grabar, for example, provides a detailed analysis of its falsehoods. The result of this Marxist indoctrination has been that Western universities now churn out too many misguided proponents of utopian causes, instigated to despise their country, traditions, civilization, and even themselves. A significant number of students graduate from college with a crippling debt and useless pseudo-knowledge. Why should taxpayers be forced to support a poor quality education system with a self-sabotaging anti-Western agenda that divides people into ever-multiplying categories of victims and oppressors? While academic freedom of thought and intellectual diversity should be respected and encouraged, the Marxist takeover of education does not even tolerate genuine debate and dissent. Learning about Marxism is undoubtedly useful, but is fundamentally different from refracting history and the world through a Marxist prism, as most universities and public schools do today. Marxism is no longer a fringe movement of angry young people, but has become the norm, a dominant way of thinking in academia. What can we do in order to disarm current anti-Semitism on campus without violating freedom of speech? How do we continue to support liberty without enabling the civilizational suicide of the West? In my opinion, the solution lies in continuing to honor freedom of speech and expression on campuses, but refusing to fund departments or other administrative units, programs, or projects that enable anti-Semitic attitudes and activities, including but not limited to protests, occupations, and events, supporting terrorist organizations such as Hamas or ISIS, any boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS activities, any slogans calling for the annihilation of Israel and the Jews, and other similar expressions of hate. The proponents of such ideas can continue to espouse them privately if they so desire and engage in free speech, but this does not mean that taxpayers should sponsor them. Allowing free speech and debate is fundamentally different from actively funding destructive ideologies and activities, especially since this anti-Western ideology is an intolerant, aggressively proselytizing secular cult. If it were to have its way completely in Western universities, no dissent or even dialogue would ever be possible. The solutions proposed in this lecture are meant to supplement other promising initiatives, such as eliminating discriminatory policies and restoring academic merit, or removing federal support for student loans that finance universities engaging in anti-Semitism. What are these supplemental solutions? On the federal level, we could petition Congress to pass a bipartisan bill changing the criteria for awarding federal grants to universities. Billions of dollars go to universities in federal grants alone every year. Federal grants should only support purely academic, apolitical research with proven merits, such as cancer research, for example, in the sciences, or time-honored liberal arts instruction in the humanities and social sciences. Any future grant agreements with academic institutions would need to be reviewed and revised in order to ensure that all grant funds would only support the specific purposes of the awarded research and teaching projects. No marginal cost that can support administration that enables anti-Semitism. Next, we could work with state governments to implement similar reforms in the funding criteria. No administrative units, programs, projects, or events that enable anti-Semitism should be paid for with taxpayers' funds. Once universities lose government funding that enables anti-Semitic activities, their anti-Western enthusiasm will undoubtedly dwindle. This will have the additional benefit of restoring genuine academic freedom and improving educational quality. It would hopefully help to reverse the closing of the American mind against which Alan Bloom so passionately argued. The current assurances from various university administrations that they will not tolerate anti-Semitism sound nice, but we need to take concrete steps to effect change. We need to act lawfully, peacefully, democratically, but also firmly and effectively. If not now, when, as the Bible says. In conclusion, I would like to play one of my favorite Hebrew songs, Horshat Chai Calyptus, as a gift of hope and support to Israel and her courageous people in these trying times. After we play the song, I invite all of you to join us during a modest reception that also supports people with autism. And you're welcome to ask any questions in English or Bulgarian that you may have during the reception. So now we'll play this song. Thank you for your attention.